33 years ago, I was met with a diagnosis of end stage ovarian cancer at the age of 19. I did not have any pretense that I was going to kick this. They also said the same thing. You should not be here. And in fact, you won't be here because there's nothing we can do for you. My actual diagnosis was on October 21st, 1991. And at that time, they didn't expect me to see January 1st of 1992.
Hi, I'm Dr. Matthew Halpert, founder and CEO of Immunocine, where we uniquely work to reprogram cancer patients' immune system to finally start targeting and attacking their cancer in a truly physiological and robust way. With me today is Dr. Nasha Winters, who is an absolute giant in this space of utilizing your own biology to fix what amounts to a biological mistake. And so, Dr. Winters, or I'll call you Nasha from this point forward, thank you for being on this call with me. You and I have worked together for a couple of years now, and we've continued to learn how our two approaches to cancer treatment is very synergistic.
Yes.
And we've seen a lot of crossover patients greatly benefit really from both. And so, just a pleasure. Oh, it's always a pleasure to get to talk to you. I think it'd be a great opportunity to start because, as Immunocine is gaining credibility and followers, and we are constantly kind of referring to the metabolic terrain now and this approach, I think it'd be great if you would kind of introduce yourself to some of our newcomers that maybe aren't as familiar with you and your story and kind of the things you've discovered. And so,
Cool.
Yeah, if you just maybe start with a little background on how you even got into the world of cancer, which is no one's favorite, but
Exactly.
here we are. So, yeah.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Matt. This is an absolute joy. I mean, you and I have been creating this relationship and understanding and learning and understanding how much our worlds can mutually support one another and enhance a much better patient outcome. So I just want to extend my extreme gratitude before diving into my story because I probably should start with truth be told, I was skeptical and I was hesitant.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm always listening to my patients. And when I had a patient that said, I'm going to go get a T-cell dendritic vaccine, I'm like, oh, wait, stop, save your money, put it elsewhere. I've been seeing this come and go for 20 plus years, never seen anything good on the outcomes. Patients going to Mexico, to Germany, all over, never seen anything of it. I'm like, just don't waste your money. Well, he did it anyway, without telling me until after the fact. And I was so certain he was going to be in trouble from it, or that it would do absolutely nothing, that I was humbled to the core when he started showing me what the process was. And when he started telling me about how you differentiate from the rest of the community out there, to the point where you and I ended up landing on a conversation, and we've had dozens and dozens and dozens of patient, combinations since then. So I just want to acknowledge my own humility and interest and curiosity and my own awareness growing in this. So I just want to say that up front so that people understand that this was a relationship that was started from literally nothing into helping understand each other's worlds in a really profound way. So it's really awesome when you get to meet other people like that and learn from each other, even in your differences and your lack of awareness and lack of education. It's been a really cool process. So I want to thank you, Dr. Matt, for being someone also willing to engage in the unknown with somebody else.
No, absolutely. And your skepticism, as I recall, was, I think I said,
Warranted.
warranted, perfectly founded. Dendritic cells have decades of experience not working. A lot of impressive failures. And so almost the whole impetus for starting Immunocine was, oh my gosh, we actually figured out kind of that missing piece, how to get dendritic cells on the right track. And given how much noise there is out there, someone has to do this right. And so, obviously, we're doing FDA clinical trials, we're publishing papers, we're doing those things, but cancer patients of today don't always have time to wait for tomorrow. And so how do we legally and ethically and correctly offer this today? And so, no, I fully understood, and I still understand all the skepticism. Always, I'm a scientist, right? Love to talk science. Admittedly, before I got into this world, I really wasn't super familiar with you either. And a ton of patients were, using your name. And I'm just like, who is this woman? And of course, oh my gosh, she's the other half of me. She's doing things the right way. There's a lot of benefit, of course, to standard of care treatments. That's neither you or I just denigrate that path if it makes sense. But that doesn't mean you can't use your own biology. That doesn't mean you can't improve what fuel you're using or how to use your own immune system or things like that. Like, look at the whole picture. And so many people, including, unfortunately, mainstream doctors, get sometimes very narrowly focused on a checklist. And that's just not how biology works. And so, so no, I definitely remember that beginning. And, I remember I brought you over to the dendritic cell side. There is some utility here.
You did. You converted me.
Yes. But tell us a little bit about your entry into cancer and why you're here.
Perfect. Well, and that's the thing is that I think starting with that story about how you and I got engaged was also, I've always been skeptical, right? I've always been questioning and understanding what's out there. And so back, my gosh, at the time of this recording, 33 years ago, I was met with a diagnosis of end-stage ovarian cancer at the age of 19. And it was missed because in 1991, no one was looking at a 19-year-old and thinking they were going to have a disease like this. So I'd had a lot of health issues from pretty much my entire life that this was, this is just your IBS being activated, or just your endometriosis, or your polycystic ovarian, or your rheumatoid arthritis, or your all the different things. They just thought it was worsening of conditions I'd already been diagnosed with. And so by the time my roommate found me unconscious, rushed me to the hospital, that would have been at that time, like my 5th or 6th time in a 5-month period of landing in the ER. This time they admitted me to have a deeper dive because they realized something else had changed since the last time they saw me. That's when, unfortunately, without going into all the details, they found I had a complete bowel blockage. My liver was filled with tumors. My whole pelvic cavity was filled with tumors. I had fluid in my lungs. I had fluid buildup around my heart. My oxygen rate stats were in the 70s. I had a grapefruit-sized mass on my right ovary. I had an abdomen filled with lots and lots of little tumors. And my kidney, the tumor was pushing so much against my ureter that my kidney was in failure as well. So it was a lot.
You should not be here.
I should not be here. And they also said the same thing. You should not be here. And in fact, you won't be here because there's nothing we can do for you. I mean, that's the essence of it. I was too sick. If you can imagine, if you're not a clinician, it probably should even make just common sense that you cannot give someone who's got organ failure chemo, right? You can't go and cut open someone who's got that extensive of disease. You can't radiate anything. Everything was so massive and numerable. So standard of care options in 1991, that was it. And so when the diagnosis finally came after biopsies and whatnot, it took about 3 weeks for me to get the final diagnosis. They figured it was the origin of ovary, but this is 1991, guys, so not quite the same technologies we have today. My actual diagnosis was on October 21st, 1991. And at that time, they didn't expect me to see January 1st of 1992. And so here we are all these years later. And to give, fairness of this, their hands were tied. There was no they didn't abandon me. There was nothing to offer. And so for me, I didn't expect to fight it or survive it because I was pre-med, because I was already scientifically inclined, because I was already kind of a systems thinker and just a curious human by nature. I just wanted to understand why. And I wanted to understand why as I was dying. I did not have any pretense that I was going to kick this. So a couple interesting things happened along the way, some simple ones. That bowel blockage led to my inability to eat for about 2.5 months, which we now have some data to back my experience of I was likely helping my body in the fasting state, changing my metabolic pathways accidentally. I was leaving a lot of high stress, high trauma environments behind. So I was not literally stewing in the soup that was contributing to, sympathetic overdrive, which is a huge proliferator of cancer cells. I was no longer taking the handful of pharmaceuticals that they were giving me for wrongful diseases that were also contributing to destroying my immune system, such as antibiotics, antifungals, opiates for pain, reflex medication, hormones. They kept me on such high hormones from the age of 11 on for my endometriosis and my polycystic ovarian. So stopping all of those likely had contribution to this. This is 1991, guys. There was no Dr. Google, there was no forums, there were no immunocines out there in the world. There was nothing in the realm of integrative oncology, anything. And so I just kind of kicked the can down the road and figured it out and stumbled and fell a lot for many years. In fact, it took me about 10 years, which surprises people when I say this, to really stabilize my process. No one wanted to talk to me when I sort of surprised them months later that I was still alive. They're like, we don't know what to do with you. Like you still are too sick to actually have anything done. And so it was a strange journey for me, but that journey has been the most unbelievably gratifying, unbelievably rewarding experience of my life. And so in that, I have been on a 30+ year journey of understanding cancer personally, as well as in general, from a different perspective. I've literally traveled all over the world and studied with the best of the best in conventional oncology and integrative oncology, even in like shamanic and seemingly alternative or vitalistic therapies that are out there, because I was curious about what's working and why for somebody. I was also working in a library where I stumbled across the work of Dr. Otto Warburg and started understanding cancer from a different lens beyond genetics, looking at its mitochondrial metabolic underpinnings, and started playing in that field. I started reading the work of Dr. Mina Bissell, who started her research in the extracellular matrix, basically the environment in which the tumor lives in, its impact on cancer. She became a hero to me in that time. I ran across the research of Dr. Candace Pert and Dr. at that time Bruce Lipton. His book didn't even come out for another 20 years on biology of belief, but started understanding the impact of adverse childhood events on our immune system and how it regulates, understanding the impact of our belief systems and our stress responses, and started to reconstruct my major from chemistry and biology pre-med to psychology biology into a neuropsychoimmunology focus. So it's just evolved, and I've just been absolutely blessed to meet so many profound teachers along the way. Some of those teachers are patients. Some of those teachers are researchers. Some of those teachers are clinicians. Some of those teachers are just healers that have influenced my belief system around what is cancer and how can we approach it differently. And so to your point, what you and I are seemingly at a really powerful coherence around is that we both recognize the environment in which that tumor is expressing is where we actually should be putting our attention. And so that might be called like you said, the biology. Some call it the the tumor microenvironment. Some call it the extracellular matrix. I call it the terrain. But that environment is something we can manipulate. We can stimulate or suppress. We can support or enhance. And that's where, my gosh, Dr. Matt, for years, I tried to talk to conventional oncologists when I was taking care of my patients I was in practice for 17 years, direct care. I couldn't even have a conversation about the immune system. They literally poo-pooed me on that. It was just like, we don't talk about the immune system, right? It just didn't, there was it's crazy, right? Then that's so. In my career, I've watched immune systems being completely off the discussion to the person they suppressed and ridiculed the most winning a Nobel Prize for his work 30 some years later in the checkpoint inhibitor world. I've watched that whole process go over these 3 decades. I have watched people disregard the microbiome, disregard the role of inflammation, disregard the role of cortisol and stress response, disregard the role of circadian rhythm. And yet these have all won Nobel Prizes in the last 10 years, right?
Yep.
All the things I was seeing to keep myself alive and help tens of thousands of patients stay alive actually have the data to back it now, the studies, the interest to back it. So you and I are going after the same thing, because what was happening with patients is they weren't, and I want people to understand, this is not to discredit or disregard standard of care, but my patients were not dying from cancer. They were dying from an overwhelmed system from the aggressive treatments to deal with their cancer in more cases than not. Now, yes, some obviously died directly of cancer, but more often than not, that wasn't the case. And I kept trying to find ways to communicate and find a way like, how can we change that? How can we make standard of care work more effectively with less shrapnel to the healthy tissues? And the biggest impact we can have on that is in harnessing the power of our immune system.
Yeah.
And this is where, you and I were talking right before the recording. When patients reach a point where they're no longer responding to standard of care will often give more of the same. They'll be like, we're just going to give you more of this particular cocktail of chemotherapy or targeted drug and hope for the best. Well, at that point, there's nothing left to work with. And then when we started getting excited about the immune therapies and standard of care, we would send those patients that had been so overly treated by standard of care on to immune therapies and have underwhelming results or even dangerous results when it overzealously activated a system that was very, very vulnerable. And so finding that very delicate balance of when to push and when to pull back and when to enhance and modulate, that's the elegance of the future of integrative oncology today, is looking at the personalization, the precision, the modulation versus suppression or kickstarting, like either extreme, stimulating or extreme suppression is sort of the way we've dealt with it all this time. You have found a very beautiful, elegant sort of dialing up and down process that harnesses the wisdom of what is remaining of an intact immune system and having it help the body work with itself and even with other therapeutic interventions to make those therapeutic interventions work better than they had on their own or ever before.
Yeah, no, I mean, excellent stuff. 1991 actually sounds like a pretty big year, not just because of what's your story, but, you're referring earlier to Dr. Jim Allison and the anti-CTLA-4. He largely discovered that in 1991. And
I did not know that. That's so cool.
And then it took 20 years for that to really finally get into the mainstream light. And then, yes, he did not too long ago win a Nobel Prize, but science unfortunately moves slowly. And it just, even what we work on now, we technically discovered almost 20 years ago now, and we've been working on, and yes, it's getting there, but it just takes time. And so I largely, I'm an immunologist, so I'm biased. That's what my doctorate is in, but I do see cancer largely as an immunological disorder. Sometimes one cell becomes 2, and instead of stopping like it should, it becomes 4 and becomes 8, becomes 16. And we have a defense system that is supposed to see that and eliminate it. And, in the event of diagnosable cancer, it's failed. It's ignorant. It doesn't know it's not that it can't fight it off. It's that it doesn't know. And so,
exactly.
And you're obviously a walking example of when your immune system, when your own body kicks into gear, we can debate on, is it too late for a patient or not? No one has a crystal ball, but arguably you could argue it's never too late. And when you get your immune system in the game, well, it's going to go to work. And so, I kind of view chemo as, or these toxic drugs. It's almost like you are putting an airstrike over the battlefield and you're just dropping bombs. And yes, you're going to blow up the bad guys, but you're also blowing up good guys. It's not a very specific response. And utilizing immunotherapy the way we are doing is, instead of doing that, we're going to our own soldiers and giving them the information and the weaponry to fight. And it's very two different, modalities. And it just, depending on the patient's situation, is what one might call for the other. Every now and again, you do need an airstrike to buy time. But
right.
That, even if you have to do that, does that mean, well, okay, then I shouldn't give my soldiers the information or the weapons? Right. No, I can't say that.
You still want them to have resources. Yeah. Well, the way I love how you brought this up, because the way I describe to, if I'm explaining this, say, on an airplane to a stranger or a 5th grader, I explain very simply, and I actually explain this to a lot of my colleagues too this way. The immune system, it needs 3 things to function. I call it the 3 R's. Okay. And that's the ability to recognize. So that's the immune surveillance. There's different terminologies for these things from standard of care, but it's need to call it the 3 R's. So recognize, respond. And when I say respond, and I mean appropriate response, because we can either overzealously respond or under respond. And so respond meaning like the modulated, normalized way. And then remember so that, hey, if this shows up again somewhere, I know what to do. Right? It's like, I got this. When we end up with a cancer diagnosis, at least one and more likely all three of those are off grid, right? And so what happens then is if we are trying to bring in these therapies in an environment that those three R's are offline, there's like nothing for them to engage with. It's like those treatments just kind of land flat and to your point can just kind of napalm the field or just bounce off and have no effect at all. And so when you can change that environment to make it start to have its surveillance back on and be more responsible and balanced and modulated in its response to the situation, and then recognize, oop, you're trying to come back again. I see you. I'm coming your way. This is what's so elegant about this approach, and it can be done in such a collaborative way, I guess. Like, I don't want people to ever think that it has to be alternative only or just standard of care. You are such a beautiful bridge for what you do between weaving in, like you said, sort of the terrain with the tumor itself and bringing those two to a very powerful crossroad together.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you and I do that very well. And I mean, to be clear to anyone watching this, neither you or I are ever, dead set against standard of, in a lot of cases, and obviously, we're working with standard of care doctors in the clinical trials, their hands are very often tied, even like they were in 1991. It's like, this is what they can offer. And unfortunately, it's a little behind the times, and science does move slow. And so for forward-thinking patients, it's very hard to hear. It's like, well, I think you said it earlier, we'll do this one standard of care chemo until it stops working. Right. And then we'll try something else and that's all they have. Yeah. And sometimes it is about money. Sometimes it is, no one's going to make money on Tic Tacs. And so it's unlikely there's going to be clinical trials that really get that across the board, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work. And so, I mean, I think, people have asked, I've been asked like, oh, well, would you recommend the metabolic terrain approach? Would you recommend the Immunocine approach? And I'm like, what are you talking about? You need to do both.
Working together.
And it's like, well, we're going to fix your immune system. We're going to physiologically, we're going to take your cancer, your dendritic cells, reprogram them in the lab, and then put them back in your lymphatic system. And your immune system's going to go to work. There you go. There's a Lamborghini. But if you don't have the right fuel or tires or maintenance, okay, it's not going to work as well. And vice versa. You could have all the best equipment, but if you don't have those three R's really from the top down, you're also missing a component. And obviously in both cases, patients get, I don't want to say lucky, but sometimes they do have, they do, they do have a good fuel source and they just need this thing. Or, hey, their immune system was sort of fighting and it just needed better energy. And so that happens. Yeah. But if I'm a stage 4 or, any cancer patient, I'm going to use everything I've got that makes scientific sense. Makes scientific sense. Let me be clear. Not everything you see on YouTube, not because someone posted something on Facebook. Scientific sense. That's kind of critical. I hear a lot of things out there. So,
I think that's one of the things that saved my life back in 1991 was not having Dr. Google and not having all the well-meaning shout out advice from influencers who really haven't any clue. They might have had their own anecdotal N of one, which is great. Celebrate that. Wonderful. But for you to tell people this is how it's to be done, not helpful. And so to your point about, I love it, the analogy you use about the Lamborghini, it's like, well, we can give you this Lamborghini, but if the tires haven't been serviced or the oil hasn't been changed or all the things, it's only going to drive down the road so far. And so that is what the metabolic approach is. We look at these 10 fundamental drops in the bucket individually and collectively and how they're interfacing with each other. So your genetics and epigenetics, your what fuel source, so your metabolic health. So what are you primarily fueling those cells with? More carbs, more protein, more fats, and that whatever ratios. The third one is what other toxins might you be exposed to on a regular basis or unknown to you that needs to be taken out to make the environment less vulnerable. The microbiome, my God, this is so massive, especially when you're talking about the immune system. And I'd like to come back and talk about this piece for a moment too, of how it relates very much with what Immunocine is doing. Then the immune system itself, that's like where you guys are the superstar shining. Inflammation, oxygenation and angiogenesis, which is blood flow to the tumor. We want angiogenesis to our healthy cells, but not to our cancering cells. And then our hormone regulation, hormone modulation, stress and circadian rhythm biology, and the big one, mental emotional drops in the bucket. So this sort of accumulative, like the mitochondria, think of that as your bucket, the information of these 10 drops coming in, all of us have a different threshold and a different combination within our bucket. And when you take that further to think about the mitochondria are sensing agents. They take in information, everything you're putting in, on, and around you. They're then translating that information, and then they're sending signals out. And a big job of the mitochondria is immune surveillance and immune recognition. The part runs the 3 R's, right? And so with that, if, for instance, you come to Immunocine expecting that the magic is coming from the injection, from the treatment itself, you have to remember that if you still are ingesting large amounts of glucose, carbohydrate, your insulin levels are high, your immune system is not working as well. It completely suppresses your immune function. If you're got major issues with your microbiome because you've had tons and tons of overtreatment, or you're still eating a lot of glyphosate in your diet, which is, you have to go out of your way to avoid that. Or if you've got really just had a bunch of antibiotics in a period of time, your immune system will not respond as well. Most of your immune function happens in your gut. If you're living in a constant state of stress or duress, that puts your vagal nerve in a problematic place, which also directly impacts our cytokines and our various immune markers. So those are just examples that if you're not tending to these other things, your amazing therapy you can offer will only do as good as the environment in which it lands. And so you have better outcomes than most in general, but I know, because I've seen it in patients, those patients who prepare for you and then after continue the repair of their overall environment are going to be your outliers. They're going to be the people that are having a better response, a more robust response, and a more maintainable, is that a word? Response to this. And so that's the piece where I think you and I got excited about working together, is when I started seeing when the conventional standard of care immune therapy started hitting the market and they were seeing less than a 20% response rate, I could take that, double, triple that just with preparing the body for Keytruda or Opdivo and following up after. I could help their treatments work better. Well, I see the same thing with your treatments as well. I see the same thing with mistletoe or Coley's toxin, some of the other quote unquote alternative immune therapies that are out there. Again, they're only going to be as effective as the environment in which they land. And so my expertise and some of the people on your board's expertise is to help that environment receive this therapy and utilize it at its optimum.
Yep. And of course, you mentioned that as we've worked together, you've recommended some people that we've hired on the Immunocine team. One of our original people took your course, and so we are trying to better integrate so we can help patients more. Because, I mean, look, I'm not eating a cake that hasn't been baked. I don't think that's going to be very good. I think you need a really good, reliable oven. But same on the other hand, if you don't put good ingredients in, you're not going to get something good out. And so they very much work you need both. I mean, they very much work hand in hand. And I think if we keep going and we keep following the data the way we do, we're already making differences. We're already, you know as well as I do, the stats we have are, for lack of any better term, ridiculous. And if we mimic that in clinical trials in the States, it's going to make a lot of noise. And that is what we're starting to see. But that's a good starting point. And if we keep going, this will become the goal is to make cancer a speed bump, not a brick wall,
Yes.
right? You know,
Love
you get
that.
over it and you move on and you enjoy the rest of your life, and your immune system prevents that cancer from coming back, right? Immunological memory. And, you know, we just, people like you and me have to keep going, because there's, unfortunately, this is hard. This is very hard. It may seem, I don't know, maybe some people think this is easy, but it's very hard. It's a hard space to be in. It's a hard system to try and buck. And if we don't keep going, the people that are following the science and doing it right, then who is, right? And
Exactly. If not us, who?
yep,
If not now, when? And I really appreciate you just jumped in. And one thing I think is very interesting. You've been at this for over 20 years. I've been at this for over 30 years, and I love it when people come in right now. They're like, "Wow, look at all the amazing things happening." But when we've been on it for decades, sometimes you're
yeah,
like, nothing's happening. But then you get the perspective to realize, I mean, my gosh, in the last 5 years alone, the explosions, the awareness in the immune
yeah,
system, we couldn't have had this conversation. You couldn't have launched this company 5 years ago,
no,
you know?
no,
And, and
not this
this is
way.
what's so cool. And then like the conversations around understanding the other terrain impacts and the microbiome and the stress response patterns, like all these things are making your patient's experiences even better. It's just so cool to see in the conversations and the studies. In fact, one of your other doctors is part of Hopkins. I mean, Hopkins was willing to, take a stab, and they were really well known in the immunology place. The man who wrote the foreword to our mistletoe book, Dr. Luis Diaz, is now the head of solid tumor oncology at Sloan Kettering. Very, very well known in the immunology space. He left behind the clinical trial that Dr. Channing Powler took on to run the mistletoe. There's a lot of willingness and innovation happening at Hopkins, and interest in immune function and finding natural therapeutics, as well as harvesting or harnessing the endogenous wisdom of our bodies to actually
Yeah,
help combat, treat cancer and help prevent it from recurring. This is where I get excited. You have such a stellar team. You've got an MD, PhD, you've got a naturopathic oncologist, and you have a DO who's also come through my metabolic filter of this. I can't think of another organization in any of the biotech space, any of the integrative space, that has such an eclectic, well-rounded, and synergistic team behind it. So watching you grow with this in your organization just really gets me excited, because I mean, I want people to know you and I have no affiliation. We don't make money
no,
on or from each other, nothing like that. When I see something that is helping my patients, I shout it from the freaking rooftops. It's that simple. And this is something that I resisted. As I said at the beginning of our
hmm,
conversation, I pushed really hard against the generality of what we know about T-cell dendritic vaccines that are out there over the last several decades, to becoming humbled and curious about what you're doing, to watching it come full circle of paying off in a pretty significant way, to watching patients have very meaningful, real examples that we can measure and see not just how they're qualitatively feeling, but for sure how they're quantitatively doing. This is exciting times for me to see things like this.
yeah. It's it is an exciting time, I will tell you that. And it's yeah, in the past couple of years, even the worst immunotherapies are moving needles, which is
Yep.
why there's been this, the cat's out of the bag.
Yeah.
The body can do it. Your body can fight back against cancer. It's got to be done correctly, and we'll get there. And just if people like you and me keep working together, I think we'll get there faster. So
Absolutely.
before I know we're coming up on time, and I do appreciate all the time. And I always get, you and I speak so similarly, and we personalize things, and it's, scientists are just a little out there, but
Totally out there. It's the best though.
yeah. So before we go, do you have any parting thoughts? Any things you're really excited about regarding even just recent changes or the future, things you see in the field? And then definitely want to make sure to direct people over to your site, and so they can get more information on this as well. So yeah, if you just want to finish this off, we could.
Sure.
What do you think?
I think from someone who's been in this field for so long, both personally and professionally, I think the biggest piece I want to leave your listeners with is one of hope. a lot of really big positive changes have happened in the last few years that really show me that I actually might see a difference in this narrative and a difference in this outcome in my lifetime. There have been many, many decades where that wasn't the case. And I'm imagining you have felt the same. So I just want people to know that the hope is here and there is some glimmer on the horizon. The other piece here is, in finding my work, so you can read about my work in the metabolic approach to cancer, and also another book, which actually, even though it's about mistletoe, it's really about the immune system. The book Mistletoe and the Future of Integrative Oncology. It might be kind of a user-friendly book because immunology is not an easy one to understand, as Dr. Matt can attest. Might get a starting point for folks. You can also follow us on mtih.org, which stands for Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health. It's also where we have our directory that lists all of our clinicians and our allied health professionals and patient advocates who've come through our training. We're now over 700 strong in over 43 countries around the globe, and we onboard 2 different cohorts a year in both of those categories. And we're also getting ready to launch a kind of a direct-to-consumer metabolic approach to life course that people can just take to help start to on their own at home start to enhance their terrain to both be preventative of cancer, but also to enhance whatever treatments they decide to take on board. And in that directory, you'll see a lot of the amazing folks like Dr. Janet Mandel, who's now on your board, which I'm very excited about. Brilliant, compassionate woman who brings all these pieces together quite elegantly. And then you can also find me on just drnasha.com, drnasha.com. That's where you can also just see just tons. If you were interested in anything we talked about today, I've got a ton of podcasts that I've been interviewed on and summits and whatnot that we've got probably 300 different things you can listen to. But I'd also invite you to come and have a listen to metabolicmatters.org or .com. That is the podcast that I host. And we're talking about things like this. In fact, I was just on talking with Matt for a cancer summit, but I want to have you on, you and the Immunocine team, to have you come on for the podcast as well, because this is really near and dear to the listeners that find me. So with that being said, I really love how you said that together we can move faster, move forward faster. So that's where I want your listeners to really listen. It's like, listen, connect, get curious, and link arms and move all of this forward, because there is so much more that I believe we can be done. And I think we're in the process of seeing it doing just that.
Couldn't have said that better myself. So thank you. So to all the Immunocine listeners here, I think you all, if you followed us long enough, you know that we only promote things that are scientifically strong and from people that are doing things the right way. And so I'm thrilled to have Dr. Nasha Winters do this call with me, because she's one of those people, and the science she purports is very real. And we've seen that with patients we've treated as well. So please check out all the sites that she mentioned. Obviously, check us out at immunocine.com to get more information about how we are working with patients to reprogram their immune systems. And just make sure to keep following us and check back for more information later. Thank y'all.